Ready? Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar the Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiv Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jai Mudire. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, we should offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and to Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, and to Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and to Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and unto Srila Prabhupada, the translator, commentator, and our spiritual master. Nashta prayesha bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavad uttama shloke bhaktim bhavati naishtiki. By regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering devotional service to the pure devotee, all that is inauspicious within the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotion to the Supreme Lord who is glorified in transcendental songs is established as an irrevocable fact. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 14th day of December 2020 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in Canto 4, the creation of the fourth order. Chapter 28, Paranjan becomes a woman in the next life. Text number 31. Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantadam param Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param. Glenn. Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param. Ekaikasya bhavatesham Rajan arbudam Bokshite yad vankshadarar Mahiman bantaram param. Ekasya, of each one, abhavat, there became, tesham, of them, Rajan, O king, arbudam, 10 million, arbudam, 10 million, Bokshite is ruled, yet whose, Vankshadadahi, by descendants, Mahi, the whole world, Manu Antaram, up to the end of one Manu, Param, and afterward. Translation. Narada Muni speaking to King Prachina Barhishat, "My dear King Prachina Barhishat, the sons of Malaya Dhwaja gave birth to many thousands and thousands of sons, and all of these have been protecting the entire world up to the end of one Manu's lifespan, and even afterward." Purport. There are 14 Manus in one day of Brahma. A Manvantara, the lifespan of one Manu, is given as 71 multiplied by 4,320,000 years. After one such Manu passes on, another Manu begins his lifespan. In this way, the life cycle of the universe is going on. As one Manu follows another, the cult of Krishna consciousness is being imparted, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4.1. I'll say, you say. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Imam Vivasvate Yogam Proktavan Ahamavyayam Vivasvan Manave Praha Manurikshvakave Bravit. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku." Vivasvan, the sun god, imparted the Bhagavad Gita to one Manu, and this Manu imparted it to his son, who imparted it to yet another Manu. In this way, the propagation of Krishna consciousness is never stopped. No one should think that this Krishna consciousness movement is a new movement. As confirmed by the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, it is a very, very old movement, where it has been passing down from one Manu to another. Among Vaishnavas, there may be some differences of opinion due to everyone's personal identity. But despite all personal differences, the cult of Krishna consciousness must go on. We can see that under the instructions of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami began preaching the Krishna consciousness movement in an organized way within the past 100 years. The disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj are all God brothers, and although there are some differences of opinion, and although we are not acting conjointly, every one of us is spreading this Krishna consciousness movement according to his own capacity and producing many disciples to spread it all over the world. As far as we are concerned, we have already started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and many thousands of Europeans and Americans have joined this movement. Indeed, it is spreading like wildfire. The cult of Krishna consciousness, based on the 9 principles of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Bandhanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam, will never be stopped. It will go on without distinction of caste, creed, color, or country. No one can check it. The word bhokshite is very important in this verse. Just as a king gives protection to his citizens, these devotees, following the principles of devotional service, will give protection to all the people of the world. The people of the world are very much harassed by so-called religious principled swamis, yogis, karmis, and jnanis. But none of these can show the right way to become elevated to the spiritual platform. There are primarily 4 parties spreading devotional service all over the universe. These are the Ramanuja Sampradaya, the Madhva Sampradaya, the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya, and the Nimbarka Sampradaya. The Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya is in particular comes from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All these devotees are spreading this Krishna consciousness movement very widely and giving protection to innocent people who are being so much embarrassed by pseudo-avatars, swamis, that means pseudo-avatars, pseudo-swamis, pseudo-yogis, and others. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyan Anjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unminatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, what could be more appropriate for the Christmas marathon? The importance of spreading Krishna consciousness. So in this verse, King Narada Muni is describing to King Prachinabarhishat the glories of Malaya Dhvaja. Now, this seems to be part of the allegory as well. And but he's describing the way in which the Sanatana Dharma, Krishna consciousness, is propagated and maintained in the universe, or in every universe. And one of the characteristics or topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam has a little table of contents within the Bhagavatam, in the second canto. You'll find in chapter 10 at the beginning, there's a verse, 2 verses I think, that describe the 10 aspects of Krishna consciousness, or the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam. And one of them is the Manvantaras, describing how the universe is ruled, how the Manus, of course, from their name came the mankind. They set the laws in every Manvantara. Manvantara is the time span, is the lifetime of a Manu. They speak the Manu Samhita, and that is the law book for the universe, living entities living there, especially human beings and those above human beings. And each one of them has a Manvantara avatar, who's Krishna, an expansion of Krishna, Vishnu Tattva, who assist in the ruling of the universe at that time. So he's giving a description with many thousands and thousands. Arbudam Ardamam is that the Sanskrit. You've seen that Arbudam there in the second line. That's 10 million, 10 million. I don't know if that's 10 million times 10 million. It's a lot. It's just one of these numbers that it doesn't really pay to try to figure out the exact number. It's just many, many. And they all have a role to play in ruling the universe. And as Prabhupada takes off, his theme here is how Krishna consciousness, the eternal science of Bhakti Yoga, Bhagavad Dharma, is being propagated. And he refers to the very first verse to the 4th chapter, which we should know. Krishna is describing the way in which Bhakti Yoga has come down, beginning with him. I spoke it to Vivasvan, this eternal science of Bhakti, Avyayam. The word Avyayam is the most used word in the Bhagavad Gita. It means never decays, inexhaustible, doesn't decrease. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, that word Vyadi, which means disease, has the same root as this, Avyayam. No Vyaya, no Vyadi, no disease, no decrease. Disease means that body falls apart and gradually disappears. So the science of Bhakti, with everything that's transcendental and spiritual, never decreases. That's why at the very beginning of the Gita, we have this distinction between Sat and Asat. I don't know if you recall that verse, Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satat. It's one of these double negatives backwards. Na asato vidyate bhavo. That for the asat, there's no real existence, and there's no abhava, there's no non-existence for the sat. The sat is the eternal, and we're meant to go from the asat to the sat. Asato mam, sadgamaya. It's actually a prayer to the Lord. Please lead me, ma. Ma can mean not or can mean me. Please lead me from the temporary to the eternal, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. I remember learning this in Amala Bhakta Swami's ashram back in 1972. And it's actually a call, for all human beings to to offer this prayer, to accept it as an injunction. Don't be satisfied with the asat. The whole problem is that everyone's absorbed in the temporary, ever-changing world. And that means that there's no standing. We're just being tossed around like little bits of cotton in the air. Or Prabhupada gave the example of the foam and bubbles in the ocean. We come together and this is my family, this is my country, this is my brother, this is my body, and then boom, the time just takes it away and the whole thing. It's meaningless, totally meaningless. So Bhagavatam is the answer, Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the ripened fruit of all the Vedic literatures. The Vedic literatures are spoken and originally from Krishna. He imparted the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahma, who then taught it to Narada Muni, who taught it to Vyas, who thought it's best to write it down because Kali Yugites, what can we remember from one day to the next? So we need books, we need to be able to refer to it. So those books are the salvation of humanity, of us and of humanity. And because the problem is that everybody is steeped in this ignorance. And they've created a whole false world for themselves. It's all completely illusory. And we see it today. We live in a time, because of the internet, because of the way in which information is so available so widely and so quickly. Whereas before it was slow, person to person, or through books or something. But now everyone can find his own reality on the internet and get onto the site and have it, encouraged until people are believing things that are completely contrary to fact. What to speak of, the whole thing is contrary to reality because it's all the illusory energy. But we can see it at play, and so it's really a war between reality and unreality. Maya's tricks and her illusory, influence, which is so powerful. Without Krishna, she wins every time. To keep people illusioned, to think that they're the body, to think they can enjoy through the body, and that because your body looks like my body, you're my brother, let's form a nation, let's form a tribe, and kill those people who look different. It's a tragedy. The soul, which is meant to be eternally related to Krishna, when consciously, enjoying eternal life in the spiritual world, has now come down to this temporary material world and is just struggling so hard just to forget about the real reality of it, which is old age, disease, and death, and try to eke out some enjoyment and be defeated again and again and again. So this is why Prabhupada worked so hard to produce these books. And it wasn't while he's doing that, he's traveling all over the world, giving lectures, encouraging his devotees, meeting outsiders, anyone interested, newsmen, They would come to cover this phenomenon. As Prabhupada says it right here in this purport, it's spreading like wildfire, There was a certain point when the movement was increasing like exponentially. I remember devotees who were in that, in L.A., Temple, New Dwarka, in 1970. Early on, Prabhupada had gotten it. It was by far the best facility in ISKCON. You had this big church, you had other buildings and so forth. Gradually they got more. But Prabhupada was planning to set up there. I mean, that was the world headquarters. He could write his books. He had all kinds of support. The weather was really conducive, it wasn't too cold. And people were joining every day. He had such competent people who were helping him, Vishnu Jan and Karandar and all kinds of people, But, this is what Prabhupada described it. Krishna had other ideas. Because, this whole thing of familiarity breeds contempt. So he stayed there in that one spot for 8 months. And he set up what we enjoy today as the morning program. Didn't just start with, 1966. It developed there and was finalized and refined in New Dwarka during that time. 1970, for about the first, from the beginning of the year through May and June, maybe even later. But what happened was that devotees became, used to having, can you imagine? Living in the temple with Prabhupada around all the time, and seeing him and worshiping him, and people. I remember, I think I was talking to Dhanavir Maharaj. He would stay at Beverly Hills at that time? They didn't have quarters for him there? Yeah. But he would be there for the morning program all the time, and obviously. And Dhanavir Maharaj was saying, at one point I read in a book or a lecture or something, that people were joining every day. You would get one devotee here, another devotee here, kirtans going out. I don't think book distribution was very big yet, but they would go out with the parties and do BTGs and all this kind of thing. They think they started the incense business sport. But what happened was devotees got, everybody was a neophyte, of course, and they became, too complacent having Prabhupada with them. And there were a couple of incidents that Prabhupada became very disturbed at. Imagine coming to seeing, and sometimes we find the pictures, not so much anymore, but I remember it used to be a regular thing. The pictures were not in the right order. And I said, hey, I put them in the right order. Imagine coming in and see Bhaktisiddhanta upside down. You've heard of that? Prabhupada was extremely upset to see that. It showed, a lack of attention, just spacing out, I think it was at that time that the There was salt in the Charanamrita. That was a famous one. Who made us? Some new bhakti said, Anyway, the whole thing, and then the thing that clinched it was that he found that his letters, his correspondence was being filtered. People weren't letting all of his correspondence get through. And that was it. And then he called up a couple of devotees, get me out of here, and everything. And he wasn't planning to go. But he eventually went to India and started the first India tour. He didn't have so many devotees with him, but it was soon after that he called for devotees to come. And they had a whole crew, Yamuna, and others came, the singers and huh? Yeah. Prabhupada said that the deity told him he wanted to go to India. So anyway, that started a whole other chapter in ISKCON, preaching in India, and suddenly you feel, he's speaking to 1,000 people, 10,000 people in Delhi. He had these big pandals, and people came. And it's all because, as Prabhupada knew very well, he had his white elephants dancing with him. He had Westerners, which had never been seen before. And they were enthusiastic and they were pure, and everything, and that's just like revolutionary. So, it's worth recounting that because Prabhupada is talking about how, the movement is spreading. And how he even gives, it's kind of rare, but he does it here, he's praising his god brothers. They're also preaching in their own way, So it's, the whole idea is that it's a missionary movement. You get this right from the beginning of the Bhagavatam. I remember reading the first canto, you get to the 5th chapter, and you see Narada Muni's instructions to Vyasadeva, for writing the Bhagavatam. It's very fascinating that after writing all of these literatures, including the Mahabharata, which has the Gita in it, and all the other Puranas, you get a list of them in the 12th canto. And we've heard of some of them, Kurma Purana, even the Padma Purana, all of them. And Padma Purana has plenty about bhakti in it. But it's not wholly and solely from beginning to end just about Krishna and Krishna bhakti and Krishna's avatars and Krishna's devotees. So Vyasadeva and Vedanta Sutta he had written, and all the Upanishads. So he was unsatisfied. So Narada Muni comes down, and apparently Vyasadeva had suspected why, but he confirms it. And then he starts preaching to him, and Prabhupada said, I just heard the lecture, he chastises him, he criticizes it, just as Krishna does in Arjuna when he finally surrenders, Ashochanam Bashochastram. So, the first verse he speaks of the series, and Prabhupada will quote these verses extensively. Nayad vachas chitta padang hare yasho jagat pavitram paganita kahachit tad vaya samtirtam ashanti manasa naryatta hangsa nidamanti shikshya. Have you ever seen the crows? Sometimes you get crows around here, and they're always trying to pick at some, some garbage, some food that's been discarded. You can see them, Caw, 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 And he says, those words, Nayad vachas chitta padang, they may be very beautifully composed. You think of Shakespeare or any beautiful, like that. But they're devoid of any glorification of Krishna. Hare Yasho Jagat Pavitram Praganita Karachit. He said, the fame and glories of Hari, which purifies the whole universe, it's devoid of that. He says, such writing, such literature is like a pilgrimage place for crows. In other words, it's a garbage. And I read some commentaries, and he said, yeah. Narada Muni's saying all that you wrote so far is just a big pile of garbage. We don't say it in so many words, but he's saying like that. Come on, he's got the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. But the point is that it's not sufficient to cause a revolution in the impious lives of the people in general. And that's what the next verse is about. He says, though the swan-like devotees never go there. Prabhupada describes in the purport, the swans and the crows are different birds. Birds of a different feather go to different places. So the crows are not going to like what the swans eat. And the swans are not going to go near what the crows eat. The swans like the pure lakes, and they just eat the lotus buds and like that, So the next verse is very important for this whole movement. Because Prabhupada took that verse and he put it in his preface. The preface mainly of a book more or less tells you why and how you wrote the book. And the next verse describes the Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, encouraged him to write those 3 volumes of the first canto, without which there would be no movement. Prabhupada was very determined to get those books published, and he had those, when he had those in his hand, he felt he had some ammunition that he could actually preach. He felt very, enlivened and inspired. So the Tad Bhagava Sargo, Janadaga Viplavo, Yasmin Patishlokam Abadnivatapi, Namanyanantasya Yashonkitanayak Shinbandigayanti Vinandi Sadhava. So the sadhus, they will read the creation of words, literature. Bhagava Sarga literally means something you write, which is Janata Aga Viplava. Every word is so important. Aga means sin. Viplava means revolution, capsizing the boat, literally, of a sinful society, of a civilization, misdirected civilization. That's what Prabhupada is. Those words, which are meant to bring about a revolution in this misdirected civilization, every verse may be miscomposed. In other words, it's exactly the opposite of Chitrapadam. It's not literally professional or very polished, but it wholly and solely glorifies Krishna, and therefore can bring about that revolution in consciousness, which is what's needed. Nothing less is needed. That is accepted and heard and chanted by the great devotees, even if it's not perfectly composed. And so, why is it so important for the movement? Because Prabhupada, he mentions this in his preface, is that the English is second language, my writing is not so perfect, it will certainly fail, but because it's sincerely presented, those who are sincere will accept it, and in other words, he was encouraged to write it and publish it by that verse and instruction of Narada Muni. Just make an effort and Krishna will provide everything. And that's exactly what happened. He came to America with those books. Those are the books those devotees were reading in 26 Second Avenue. They're reading it. They hear Prabhupada give Bhagavad Gita class. You hear that, He's speaking and he's translating as he goes on. It's kind of a live summary study. Like, this is how he created the summary studies of the Nectar of Devotion and Krishna book. And that is a running translation with occasional commentary, but not the systematic word by word, that's the idea. So they would hear the Bhagavad Gita that way, but they would also read the Bhagavatam. And, Prabhupada was sustaining himself. He would sell those books. The bookstores. I know some of the bookstores he went to. I lived in New York. There's what we would call New Age bookstores today. There's books like. So then, Krishna just poured down the mercy on him after struggling, and then suddenly the whole thing took off. And in those years, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, movement just exploded. Not just in America, all over the world, especially in America and Europe, when those devotees went to England, and then they were able to meet George Harrison and get, him to produce that record. And Prabhupada was just like, he saw it happening, and he just, went with it. He hardly slept at all, and he was writing so many letters, and managing everything that way. So this is the mood in this particular purport. As far as we're concerned, we've already started the ISKCON, and many thousands of European Americans have joined this movement. It's spreading like wildfire. So that's what it's going to take. I mean, this earth, since I've been around, it's like, when I was a kid, it was all like, oh, yeah, the Russians got the nukes, we got the nukes. We'd have movies where they would show the bombs blowing up, And it was just like, I was terrified, And it was like, that's what, we're going to live with this now forever. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis came, I've talked about this, and this just to mean, this is it. This is as far as I'm going to get. I was 14 years old. I mean, just imagine, here's this 2 nuclear powers. They both have ICBMs that can kill each other. And Russia, they install nukes right in Cuba, 90 miles offshore. That was the freak out, Okay, it's so many thousands of miles. You have 20 minutes to get ready, pray or something, 90 miles means you don't have any time. And so suddenly there was this big confrontation, and I won't get into the story, but it was definitely the hand of God that intervened. That all you guys wouldn't have been born. Maybe you would have been born.
3-year-old or whatever you were. But the thing is, I'll just tell you this, because there's like 50 of these. There's a whole bunch of them. I mean, this is encouraging in one way, because the way I see it now is that, Prabhupada arrived like 2 years later, right? I mean, it happened in the fall of, 3 years later, it happened in the fall of 62, and fall of 65, Prabhupada came to America. So you've got this, just visualize this now. You've got the whole U.S. military is in South Florida, practically, ready to invade Cuba, But Kennedy is holding him back. No, we're going to try to, see if we can resolve this without World War III. And so what he did was he more or less blockaded Cuba. He didn't call it a blockade, because you can call it a blockade, that's an act of war, then you're at war. So they call it a quarantine. Sound familiar? So then you have these Russian ships steaming toward Cuba with some parts for for the nuclear weapons they already installed on there, whatever. So the whole world is listen to the news. How close are the ships? How close are the ships? So they're just coming all the way from Russia. You can imagine it takes a while across the Atlantic Ocean. So finally, they reach the quarantine and they stop. And our guy said, they blinked. The other guy just blinked, So it's a standoff. The whole world is watching. Everybody's writing. Bob Dylan is writing his song, and the hard rain will fall. You've heard of that? He's so famous, The hard rain, he was sitting in New York City. The hard rain is nuclear weapons. I don't think it was so clear at the time, but that's what he was talking about. So then, eventually what happened, that we knew about at the time, is that there was a communication. This is another problem. There's no internet. The phone system doesn't work. They were communicating by telex, So Kennedy directly communicates with Khrushchev, and neither of them really wanted a war, And they work out a compromise, But before that happened, you had this meeting of these ships, and what no one knew at the time, certainly it wasn't publicized, the Russians had these submarines that were with the other ships, and some of them had nuclear-tipped torpedoes to completely destroy our big ships, the aircraft carriers, whatever we had. We had our whole Navy there. So they were down, but you had the problem of communication. So we could see, with our underwater radar, that there were these submarines there. So we wanted them to surface. That was the idea. So we communicated, we thought, with Moscow, that we're going to drop these depth charges. Everyone knows what they are, right? You drop them down and they blow up underwater. But they're not lethal. They're just to scare them. We're not trying to bomb them. We told them that. But they couldn't get that message to the submarines. And so we dropped these depth charges, and they think, oh, World War III has started. What do they know? So this is the way I read it. So there's each ship has two captains. One guy can't decide to throw the torpedoes. They have, this whole thing with two keys, And there's one admiral who's in charge of the whole thing. The ship's on the surface and the one below. So he has to also agree. He happened to be on the one submarine that was then depth charged. So the two captains, they said, let's go. This is the end of the world. And the admiral said, no, it doesn't make sense. Let's not do it. So he nixed it. That was it. If they had shot those nuclear torpedoes and sunk one of our huge aircraft carriers, it would be all over. We would have bombed Cuba, and then Russia would have bombed us. So, of course, so what happened is they surfaced, and they said there's no war going on. So the Earth was saved by Krishna's arrangement. And there's if you're interested, there's like 50 of those incidents, which I won't get into right now. But so Krishna wanted Prabhupada to come. This is the way I see it now, and start this movement, which is really the only hope for this world, because there's more and more nuclear weapons now. They're much more powerful. They've got But the only way that the world is going to be saved is by a revolution in consciousness. It's not going to be some treaty. It's not going to be some artificial thing, some technology or something. It doesn't work that way. It's consciousness that has to be changed. And that's exactly what we're all about. And it begins with each one of us. Our consciousness needs to change and become fully purified so we can become proper vehicles for making others Krishna conscious. And as Krishna says, no one will ever please me more than that. In other words, the preacher is one who I favor the most, those who teach Bhagavad Gita, the science of bhakti. So each of us has a duty to advance ourselves in Krishna consciousness, and we also have our own internal reason for doing that, which is fine. I always, take the analogy or the model, the model of Lord Chaitanya's advent. Or say Krishna's advent as Lord Chaitanya. When you read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, you find out right at the beginning that Krishna had two reasons for coming. He had an internal reason and an external reason. And they're both defined there in the first verses of the CC. It's called the Mangalacharan. And so his external reason was to spread Krishna consciousness and save everybody. Right? His internal reason was to relish the highest levels of prema bhakti rasa from the mood of Radharani. He couldn't do that in the spiritual world. There's a whole pastime where Krishna is looking at his own reflection. In one painting, he's looking in the floor. Another, in the verse, it says it's some jewel polished. It's a mirror. He's looking at it, and he's, whoa, how beautiful. No one has beauty as great as me. But there's a limit on how much you can appreciate it. He wants to appreciate his own qualities, beauty, etc., from Radharani's point of view. No one can relish his qualities greater than Radharani because her love is supreme. She's love personified. She's love of God personified. So that's his own internal reason. But he has a whole external reason, which is to preach. And that he showed that in his Leela. Both in his Navadvip Leela, and then when he took sannyas, he went to Puri on his mother's instructions, and then he started for South India. And he's just preaching. His preaching was chanting Hare Krishna, basically. And people would see him and they would become ecstatic and change. Of course, he also met Ramananda Roy there. There's another part of it. But, so we also can have that. We have to have that. We have our own reasons for wanting to become Krishna conscious. We want to go back to Godhead, right? Krishna says it's all right to want to get out of birth, old age, disease, and death. That's part of knowledge. That's in the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, Dukkha, Doshana, Darshanam. That's a very good impetus to keep us serious, Otherwise, you suffer again, birth, old age, disease, and death, threefold miseries. So that's our own personal motivation. That's fine. But at the same time, as we advance and we get a little, this advancement in Krishna consciousness, we should more and more embrace Lord Chaitanya's other reason, which is to help others to be Krishna conscious. And they're not mutually exclusive. The point is that when you embrace austerity for helping others to become Krishna conscious, you get so much mercy from Krishna. And what's the mercy? More taste for the holy name and everything having to do with Krishna consciousness, and less taste for Maya. That's how Prabhupada says you don't need some certificate to tell you we're advancing. You can tell. If material pleasures are becoming disgusting to you, or at least I couldn't care less, and everything related to Krishna, beginning with the holy name, is more and more tasty, is more and more attractive. You hear some Krishna Katha, and your ears perk up. This is why we have all these formal things, to give us a chance to develop the taste and to get knowledge and become enlivened to study on our own. And we're reading the 4th chapter now in the evening classes, and it's interesting because it's called Transcendental Knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita. But what's come clear is that the knowledge and the action go together. You don't really know something, you may know superficially, but this knowledge is all normative. Normative knowledge means that's which guides your activities and guides your sense of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. That's the problem, is that in our illusory consciousness, dictated by Maya, we have a completely skewed view of what's right and wrong and what's good and bad. Now, didn't Arjuna say that? Karpanya doshopahatasva dharma samudha cheta. My consciousness is bewildered about what is good and bad. That's what dharma is all about. And so now I'm asking you to tell me, because I can't figure it out. He spent the whole first chapter arguing with, I know it's good. It's good if I leave. Because the worst thing I can imagine is killing my friends and relatives and guru on the other side. And he gave all kinds of reasons for it, based on the Vedas, right? But then at the end, but in the final analysis, he wasn't satisfied with his own analysis. He sat down on a chariot, dropped his bow, he's trembling, he's confused. And he says, I can't figure it out. Dharma samudacheta. So he had the greatest source of knowledge right there on the chariot with him, Krishna. Surrenders, and the whole Gita is spoken. So we can't figure it out on our own. Nobody can. All of these theories of how we're going to solve everything, the climate change, we got to figure it out. We can do it. It never happen, because you can see. You get one idea, like on the climate change things. Well, obviously, we got to stop pouring out all this carbon dioxide, right? So we have to move to non-fossil fuels, no greenhouse gases. But you've got millions and millions of people who are dependent on those fossil fuels, dependent on for their work, for their livelihood. They're going to jump up and down. No, they have to find some other way of doing it, And so they come up with some concoction. Okay, we'll just capture the carbon dioxide by some technology and this. No, it's not going to work like that. It has to change inside. People have to learn to be satisfied with much less, instead of all of this artificial, so-called civilization. Prabhupada, the first canto, you want to see, Prabhupada is preaching like anything in the first canto about the faults of the modern civilization and how it's completely gone down the wrong path. So Prabhupada was moved by that, and to try to bring about a revolution. And now Prabhupada is saying here the idea of protection, that the Manus are meant to protect the world, protect the universe that they're in charge of for so long, by their rule. They're all kings and leaders. And the protection is in the form of, the knowledge, the Manu Samhita. That's part of the protection, and enforcing those rules. So it's very much a Kshatriya position. And the knowledge is all coming down in the present day. Krishna renewed it in the beginning, of the Bhagavad, in the 4th chapter. He describes speaking it again because the science had become lost because of time. And even Krishna consciousness was practically lost for a time after Lord Chaitanya's disappearance, until Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Lord Chaitanya, it wasn't completely lost. The books were being written and so forth, but there wasn't this mass preaching movement. Everyone was so shocked, and they more or less became bhajanandis mostly. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur realized the importance of the need for preaching, and he started. And he didn't have an organization, but he wrote many, many important books, and of course he trained Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and the rest is history that you know. So we should understand our position. We're part of this whole history, which is coming down really for millions of years. And we have the great good fortune, because of Srila Prabhupada's efforts and his sincere followers, that we can partake of the same knowledge, which is presented in a way we can understand. And we can also give that knowledge to others. And in this way, do our part for saving the world, which is, part of what Krishna wants. And at the same time, save ourselves. So it's a win-win situation. All right, we've gotten to almost 8:40. I'm going to read this translation again. Again, this is still part of the allegory. Narada Muni is saying to King Prachadabarishat, the sons of Malayadwaja gave birth to many thousands and thousands of sons, and all of these have been protecting the entire world up to the end of one Manu's lifespan and even afterward. Hare Krishna. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, great. We have a mic, and we have a special facility. You can take off that mask just to ask the question.
Jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I was thinking of Swami Jesus. He says, don't cast your pearls before swine. So it means like if you have something really sacred, you don't just indiscriminately show it to anyone.
Yeah.
And even Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, I think it's chapter 18, verse 67 that this
Yes.
Bhagavad Gita is confidential knowledge and it shouldn't be explained to those who are not austere or engaged
Yeah.
in devotional service. So how is it okay to just go out and indiscriminately like offer Bhagavad Gita to any rascal out there that'll give you some money?
Yeah. Prabhupada talks about this, is that how, if you look in that purport, he doesn't talk about book distribution, but he talks about how, but because Krishna is saying this science should not be explained to those who are not austere, right, who are not devotees like that, So in the purport there, Prabhupada says, yes, but the devotees are, I don't know if he uses the phrase there, even more merciful than Krishna, you know what I mean? That sometimes, you'll say in classes, in gatherings, people will come who don't meet these qualities, but still, the devotees will speak. And the model is Lord Nityananda. I mean, talk about pearls before swine. I mean, Jagai Madai, they had fallen, they were born Brahmins, but they had fallen completely from the standard, and they were performing kind of every crime that was available at the time. They were just completely. And Lord Nityananda thought, oh, these are good candidates for Lord Chaitanya's mercy. So I'm going to preach to them, and by the mercy of the Lord, they'll take it. So the story. He preached it first, and then they were enraged. He and Haridas Thakur, and they started berating them, and then running after them and attack. To attack them, but they were drunk. So Nityananda and Haridas were running from them, and eventually they fell down in the street and started fighting with each other. So Haridas was saying, "See, I told you, and everyone else was telling him that they would be, dangerous to even approach them." So then another day, Nityananda goes back and he sees them again. Oh, okay, let's try it again. So he says, and this time Madai throws a piece of a pot and cuts Nityananda, bleeding. You can imagine his whole face was blood, And so, and then he again asks, despite that, he says, "Well, that's all. I'm okay." And this gets to Jagai, because they were born Brahmins after all, So Madai was going to throw another pot, and Jagai said, "No, stop." He's a saintly person, So then Lord Chaitanya heard about it, came running, and he was going to annihilate them all, both. He had his chakra, unsheathed. It was ready, and they could see that. And they were terrified, so they fell down, they offered their obeisance, And the story. So Nityananda intervened, and Jagai was first blessed, and then Madai, and they were both blessed. So the idea is that, yes, there is this injunction. And of course we know the 10 offenses, preaching the glories of the names of the unfaithful. But following the model of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, who would go everywhere and chant Hare Krishna and meet everyone, the devotees take that risk of presenting the books to people who may not, appreciate them or even, blaspheme them, whatever. Because the need is so great, and Krishna will, we have faith that Krishna will protect. So that's an exception, Traditionally, you're right. There would be, the Shudras, they're not allowed to chant the Vedas, Well, what would we have here? If we try, who's going to chant the? I wouldn't chant it. I'm worse than a Sudra. But Prabhupada said, no, the Hare Krishna mantra is so powerful that it can purify anyone and bring him to the state of Brahman and beyond Brahman. So by that standard, if someone takes up the process a little bit, then they can be completely. How glorious are those who are even born as dog eaters, the lowest, outside. That they're on their tongue, the name is dancing, They must have performed all kinds of things in the past. And in the verse before, right before or after, it says, if they just chant, then they become qualified to perform, sacrifices. So this movement is, otherwise it'd be no movement. Prabhupada would have never come. By that logic is to stay in India, and everyone was staying in India. And Lord Chaitanya's prediction wasn't coming about. So it's definitely there. We have it in the 10 offenses and so forth, but there's sanction to violate that principle for the greater principle of preaching. Go ahead, Vijay. You have something? Okay. All glories to the Prabhupada. Thank you. Haribol. Oh, you can ask me side.